Ever get that feeling like you want to really understand something complicated, but you just don't have hours to like wade through reports and stuff?
Totally.
We hear you, and that's what today is all about.
Absolutely.
You guys sent us a super interesting piece from way back in 2013.
Yeah.
A survey from the Economist Intelligence Unit. It's the one where they compared costs of living across a bunch of cities,
Right.
like 131 cities across 97 countries. So we're talking a pretty global picture.
Yeah.
So think of this deep dive as your like fast track
hmm
to understanding what that snapshot in time tells us about the world.
Okay.
We're going to zoom in specifically on the top 10 most expensive places.
Sounds good.
It's not just about, where they landed on the list. It's about what those price tags tell us about what life was like back then.
Exactly. Yeah,
Wow.
because these cities, they're not just randomly expensive.
Right.
There are reasons behind it.
Totally.
Economic forces, global trends, things like that.
Yeah.
So we're going to dig into what made these cities so pricey and hopefully uncover some surprises along the way.
Awesome. Let's jump right in then.
Okay.
Top of the list in 2013 was Tokyo, Japan.
Oh, wow.
Huge city, over 13 million people,
Okay.
and the most expensive city in the entire world, according to this survey.
Wow.
This one fact really puts it in perspective.
Okay.
You ready for this?
Yeah, hit me.
A loaf of white bread in Tokyo back then cost $9.06.
$9.
$9.06 for a loaf of bread.
Wow, that's wild.
I know, right?
That really highlights the difference in cost of living.
Yeah.
I mean, $9 for bread.
Crazy.
And coming in a close second.
Okay.
Also in Japan is Osaka.
Oh, really?
Yep, even bigger than Tokyo, over 16 million people.
Wow.
Their bread was a bit cheaper, but still pretty expensive.
Okay, how much are we talking?
$7.94 a loaf.
Still way more than you'd expect.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So 2 Japanese cities right at the top. What was going on there?
Well, a few things probably contributed to those high prices.
Okay.
Historically, Japan has had a higher price level for lots of goods and services.
Interesting.
Part of that is because of government policies like import tariffs.
Import tariffs.
Yeah, essentially taxes on stuff brought in from other countries.
Oh, okay. So that makes those imports more expensive.
Exactly. And then there are also agricultural policies aimed at supporting local farmers.
Right. Trying to help their own.
Exactly. Which can mean higher prices for food.
Gotcha.
And we can't forget about the exchange rate.
Oh, right. The value of their currency.
Back in 2013, the Japanese yen was pretty strong.
So that means even things produced in Japan would seem expensive when you convert the prices to other currencies.
Exactly. Plus, just the sheer number of people in Tokyo and Osaka
Right. Millions and millions.
drives up demand, which
Yeah.
of course pushes prices even higher.
Classic supply and demand.
Yep.
It's all connected. So it's like a perfect storm of factors.
Kind of, yeah.
Government policies, a strong economy, and just the basic economics of living in a huge urban center.
Yeah, all those things together.
Okay. Fascinating stuff. Let's move on geographically now.
Okay.
The third most expensive city on the list was Sydney, Australia.
Ah, Sydney, beautiful city.
Right.
Right?
Over 4.5 million people,
Mm-hmm.
and their price for a white loaf of bread was $5.03.
Okay, so a bit lower than Japan, but still not cheap.
Yeah, definitely not.
Makes you wonder what's going on down under.
Right. And then just behind Sydney, tied for 4th place with Oslo,
Mm-hmm.
is Melbourne, the other big Australian city?
Another great city.
It is.
About 4.2 million people.
Yep, and it's so interesting to see 2 Australian cities so high up on this list.
Yeah. What do you think is driving that?
I'm curious, too, is there something specific about the Australian economy that makes things so pricey?
Well, for one thing, Australia is an island continent.
Right.
So anything they import faces higher transportation costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Things have to travel further.
Exactly. And those costs often get passed down to consumers.
Uh-huh.
Plus, Australia has relatively high average incomes.
So people can afford to pay more.
Yeah, there's more disposable income to go around.
Makes sense.
And both Sydney and Melbourne are incredibly desirable places to live.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So there's huge demand for housing, which, as we know, is a major part of the cost of living.
Always is.
So it's a combination of things: the geographical isolation, the strong economy, and the competition for housing.
Right. It's like those factors all push prices up together.
Exactly.
So we've got the tyranny of distance, as they say,
Yeah,
plus a booming economy and the never-ending struggle for affordable housing.
it all adds up.
It really does. Okay, let's hop back over to Europe now,
All right.
where Oslo, Norway takes the title of most expensive city on the continent.
Oslo.
It was also ranked 4th overall globally, remember?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Tied with Melbourne.
Yep.
And their bread costs $6.31.
Okay, so right in between Sydney and Tokyo.
Yeah, pretty much.
Interesting.
And Europe has a couple more cities in the top 10, too.
Oh, yeah, which ones?
Zurich, Switzerland comes in at 7th.
Zurich. Okay.
Much smaller population, though, only about 400,000 people.
Wow. Much smaller than these other cities.
Yeah, and then even smaller still is Geneva, also in Switzerland, ranked 10th with a population of just 200,000.
Tiny.
And here's a funny thing.
Okay.
Both Zurich and Geneva had the same price for a white loaf of bread, $6.08.
608. That sounds familiar.
It does, isn't it?
It's the same as Paris.
You got it.
That's weird that they're all the same.
I know, right? It's like a bread price conspiracy.
Haha, maybe.
But anyway, it's fascinating that these smaller Swiss cities are right up there with the big global capitals.
Yeah, what makes them so expensive?
What do you think? I mean, they're so much smaller than a place like Tokyo.
Right, but Switzerland is known for having an incredibly high quality of life
That's true.
and a very stable economy, especially in finance.
Right. Their banking system is world-renowned.
Exactly. And all that tends to come with higher prices.
Plus, the Swiss franc has always been a strong currency.
Exactly, another factor adding to the cost.
And we can't forget about location.
Well, right, geography plays a role, too.
Both Zurich and Geneva are in kind of geographically limited areas.
I see what you mean.
Not a lot of space to spread out.
So that limits the availability of land, which drives up housing costs.
Big time.
So basically, you're paying a premium for that stability and quality of life.
And for the privilege of living in a beautiful place where space is limited.
Yeah, it's like a trade-off.
Totally. Okay, now let's talk about a truly unique case.
All right, I'm intrigued.
Singapore, which ranked 6th on this list.
Singapore. Okay.
Now, this isn't just a city, it's an entire island nation in Southeast Asia.
Oh, right, a city-state.
Exactly, home to over 5 million people.
Wow, so it's like a country and a city all in one.
Yeah, which makes its position on this list pretty interesting.
Definitely.
Singapore has a super developed economy.
Yeah, known for that.
Big focus on international trade and finance.
Global hub.
But being an island with limited natural resources, they have to import a lot of their goods. Ah, so that affects prices.
It does. Those import costs get passed along.
Makes sense.
Plus, they've got a really efficient but kind of pricey public transportation system.
Okay.
And because it's such a small area with so many people, housing is super dense and expensive.
Right. So the unique characteristics of being a city-state really influence its cost of living.
It seems that way, right?
Yeah.
It's facing a whole different set of pressures compared to a big country with lots of land.
Yeah, fascinating.
Now let's move on to a city that pretty much everyone knows and has a reputation for being well expensive.
Paris.
You got it.
Yeah.
Paris, France, ranked 8th on this list.
Paris figures.
Over 2 million people. It's the biggest and most expensive city in France.
And as we mentioned, their bread also costs $6.08.
Right, same as those Swiss cities.
Exactly.
So Paris is like the classic global city, you know?
Absolutely.
Rich history, tons of culture, a major economic hub.
Yeah, and it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
It's like people expect to pay a premium to live there. Exactly. You see Paris on this list, and you're not surprised.
Makes sense.
But the next city ranked 9th, this one kind of caught me off guard.
Okay, what is it?
Caracas, Venezuela.
Caracas, huh? I wouldn't have guessed that.
Almost 2 million people.
Mm-hmm.
And get this, their white bread cost $9.40.
Whoa, that's the highest we've seen.
The most expensive bread on the entire list.
Even more than Tokyo.
Yeah. That's what makes Caracas the real outlier here.
Right. All these other cities have strong economies.
Yeah, they're stable, prosperous places.
But Venezuela in 2013,
Yeah.
they were dealing with some serious economic problems.
Huge inflation, wasn't it?
Yep, and currency controls, which can really mess with prices.
So that explains the crazy bread prices.
Yeah, when the local currency is losing value quickly and supply chains get disrupted,
Right.
basic goods like bread become way more expensive.
It's like a stark reminder that expensive doesn't always mean good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes it points to some deeper issues.
So we've seen this range of bread prices from that $9.40 in Caracas to around $5 or $6 in places like Sydney, Melbourne, Oslo, Zurich, and Paris.
Yeah, it's interesting how just looking at the price of one simple item
Right.
can give you a sense of the overall cost of living in a place.
It's a pretty powerful little indicator.
Yeah, even though it doesn't tell a whole story, of course.
Of course, but it's a good starting point.
For sure.
So looking back at this list of the world's most expensive cities from 2013, what are some of the big takeaways? What kind of patterns do you see?
Well, population definitely plays a role.
Yeah, we saw that.
Big cities with tons of demand like Tokyo and Osaka,
Right.
they tend to be more expensive.
Makes sense.
But even smaller cities can be pricey if they're highly desirable, like Zurich and Geneva.
Yeah, those Swiss cities really stand out.
And then geography is important too,
Uh-huh.
like Australia being so isolated
Right.
or Singapore being an island nation.
Those geographical factors definitely add to the cost.
And I think the biggest takeaway is how much a country's economic situation affects the cost of living.
Totally. Caracas is a prime example of that.
Yeah, when a country is struggling economically,
Right.
it can drive up the prices of everything.
So it's this complex mix of population, geography, and economics.
Exactly. All those things intertwine.
It's really fascinating to see how they all play out.
Absolutely.
And it's important to remember that this is just a snapshot from 2013.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The world has changed a lot since then.
Absolutely. Economies shift. Global events happen.
Right. Who knows how different things look today?
Exactly. It's constantly evolving.
So I'm curious.
Yeah.
When you think about what makes a city expensive, what do you think is the biggest factor?
That's a tough one.
Is it the cost of housing, transportation, whether they have to import most of their stuff? Or is it all about the overall health of the economy?
I think it's probably a combination of all those things.
Yeah, they all play a part.
But if I had to choose one, I'd say the overall health of the economy is probably the most important.
Makes sense. A strong economy can drive up demand and prices across the board.
Yeah, exactly.
So this 2013 ranking, it really gets you thinking, right?
It does.
Like, how do you think these rankings might have changed in the past decade?
Good question.
What global events or economic shifts do you think would have had the biggest impact on the cost of living?
That's a question for our listeners to ponder.
Right. It'd be interesting to see how things have shifted.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a really thought-provoking deep dive.
I agree.
It's amazing how much you can learn from just looking at the cost of living in different parts of the world.
Yeah, it's a window into so many different factors.
Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those questions coming. We love diving deep with you.
Yeah, keep them coming.